If you ever get a letter from your US bank saying that your account has been closed, your first reaction is usually panic, and the second reaction is, what do I do next? Well, in this video, I'm gonna share the 3 reasons that US banks usually close accounts, and I'll share how you can stop these account closures before they happen, including the insanely easy and free solution that our clients use to reduce the risk of account closures for good. That way, the next US bank account that you open stays open. If this is your first time on the channel, my name is Chris. I'm the head of banking relationships here at GlobalBanks. We're a team of banking experts who help solve cross-border banking challenges for individuals and businesses. Not surprisingly, we get contacted by a lot of people who have recently had their accounts closed in the United States. And unfortunately, this is a growing problem, especially for foreign non-residents and foreign non-resident owned US LLCs. Now, if you fall into either of these 2 categories, this is a very important video for you. And I'm going to share how you can keep your bank accounts open, what not to do, and what may have triggered those account closures for you in the past. Now, before we dig into each reason for account closures and the related solutions, it's important to share a bit of tough love here, because usually when an account is closed down, at least in 2 out of the 3 instances that I'm about to share, it is your fault. Now, hear me out. What I mean by this is that you, as the account owner, you've done something that triggered the account closure. This is true whether you had an account closed by a digital bank, a fintech platform, or even a brick and mortar US bank. But there's a silver lining, because this also means that 66% of account closures are preventable if you know what triggers them in the first place. And the remaining 33% of closures can usually be resolved before the closure even happens, if you know how, which I'm also gonna share with you in a little bit. So let's dig into the first reason, which is transaction activities. Now, there are 2 types of transaction activities that can result in account closures. These include unusual transactions and high-risk transactions. What I mean by unusual is if you receive a transfer of, say, $300,000 into your account, but the largest transfer you've ever received to date is $5,000, then that would be unusual. Not impossible, but unusual. Now, on the other hand, if you start sending money to high-risk countries like Nigeria or Jamaica, and you've never done this before, those transactions will most certainly be classified as high risk. Now, in most cases, unusual or high-risk transaction activity does not immediately result in an account closure, though it can. It just depends on how unusual or how high risk the transaction is. But before closing accounts, most banks will contact you and they'll ask you for an explanation or supporting documents. And then if you don't provide sufficient information or evidence, or you don't even respond, the account will most likely be closed. Now, if your bank just happens to be in a de-risking mode, like many banks in the US are right now, then there is a chance that they'll close the account without giving you a chance to explain. This is most common in digital banking or with fintech platforms. Even cross-border transfer services like Wise typically take this approach instead of asking for the supporting documentation. Though it does depend on the transaction activity, how unusual or how risky it might be. So what's the solution? How do you avoid account closures from unusual or high-risk transaction activities? Well, the free and easy solution that our clients use that will also help you in this instance in terms of unusual and high-risk transactions and keeping your accounts open instead of having them closed after the bank flags you for these activities. But again, I'm gonna cover that in a minute. Now, if you do have a requirement to send money to high-risk countries from your accounts, there is a very good chance that your accounts, they will be closed. So you're better off not sending those transfers. Instead, think about using an international payments platform or transfer service that specifically serves those countries. Now, the second reason for account closures that I want to walk through in this video is suspicious activity. And like a lot of things, how a bank interprets high-risk behavior or suspicious activity, it's going to vary from bank to bank. But there are a lot of similarities between banks in the United States when it comes to high-risk and suspicious behavior, thanks mainly to the fact that they share the same regulator and banking norms. So the behaviors that US banks typically classify as high-risk or suspicious that many non-residents are completely unaware of, they include frequently accessing your account from different locations abroad, changing account information like addresses or phone numbers, a refusal or delay in providing supporting documentation when it's been requested by the bank, unusual use of international addresses or phone numbers, unexplained sources of wealth or sources of income, connections to high-risk industries like gambling, cryptocurrency, fraud claims or disputes being made on a regular basis against your account by third parties, rude and abusive behavior towards bank staff, negative mentions about you or your business online or in digital media platforms. And this last one, it isn't suspicious, but it can result in closures, and that is insufficient activity on your bank account over an extended period of time, usually between 6 and 12 months, depending on the bank. Okay, so here are a few solutions for the most common problems that we see that do result in account closures for foreign non-residents. If you're frequently traveling and accessing your account from abroad, this can risk account closures. And an easy solution to this is to consider using a VPN. can. This adds both security and consistency in terms of the location where you're accessing your bank account. You can set up an IP address to a major city in the state where your account is located, and that should solve any of these problems. On the other hand, if your bank requests additional information, supporting documents, or evidence to support transactions, or even your personal information, respond as soon as you can. Provide them with the requested information. And if you don't have access to the specific proof or documents that they request, you can ask if an alternative option that you do have available could work instead. You'd be surprised. Many banks are willing to work with their clients in order to provide them with sufficient information to maintain accounts and support transactions. The lesson here is pretty simple. If you're involved in a high-risk industry or you come from a country other than the United States, it's important that you find a bank that's either going to accept your profile openly or is actively seeking clients that share your country of citizenship, residency, or even the industry that you're operating in. That way, you end up with a bank that actually wants you as a client and won't unnecessarily flag you as high risk or suspicious based on your regular account activities. Okay, so not surprisingly, if your account does get flagged for suspicious activities, there is a good chance that your account gets closed. But these closures, they aren't actually the bank's fault, at least not entirely. US banks and basically all banks everywhere, they're constantly updating and adapting their internal compliance policies, and banks do this to de-risk, to get rid of unprofitable or high-risk clients, and basically get rid of anyone who is linked to unsavory activities or just cost the bank too much to keep around as a customer. And if you send money in a way or engage in any behavior that basically crosses a line that's been set by a bank's internal policies, then your account's going to get closed. Okay, so far we've covered transaction activities and suspicious activities. And the third and final reason for account closures that we're going to cover, it is the bank's concern over your client profile. There are a few ways that this can happen, but it's worth noting that most banks catch unacceptable account profiles during the account opening process. So if you are struggling to open bank accounts as a foreigner in the United States, this could very well be why. We use a specific approach for foreign non-residents of the United States to overcome these challenges when opening accounts, even without using a US tax ID like an SSN or ITIN, which I've outlined in a dedicated video I'm going to share with you in a minute. But first, let's talk about your profile and how this can lead to account closures. We especially see this in the digital banking world. In fact, many of the recent Mercury Bank closures, they tie back to this, requiring customers to provide different proofs of address in order to maintain their accounts on the platform. But it's not just Mercury, and it's not just in the United States either. Fintech and digital platforms around the world, they tend to tighten their policies after they reach a critical mass of customers. The point is, banks can change their policies, and when they do, they typically ask customers to meet those new requirements. These updates and the challenges that they cause, they fall into a few categories, which include your ability to demonstrate clear ties to the country, where the account is domiciled, and more specifically, your address. Next, your country of residence or where the business's operations are based is also an important factor that can lead to account closures in these instances. Your source of income or the primary economic activity of the business is also critical, and to a lesser extent, your country of citizenship if you're from a high-risk country, or a country that's risk rating gets changed to high risk after the account has been opened. Now, you can't do much about your country of citizenship or your country of residency. Likewise, source of income and economic activity are hard to change, though you can avoid accidentally red flagging yourself by clearly and transparently describing your source of income. But if you are facing a closure due to lack of ties to a country, or more specifically, an insufficient address proof, then you can usually overcome this either by obtaining an acceptable proof of address, or better yet, opening accounts with banks that don't require a domestic address to open an account in the first place. That means you can use your international address or the international address for your business when opening a US bank account. I covered these options in the US video that I'm about to share with you, but first let's walk through the solution that you can easily use to avoid account closures for free. It's called being upfront with your banker. If you're planning on making large transfers that are unusual compared to your current account activity, you can inform your banker. If you need to send money, say to a family member or to a business or anyone else in a high-risk country, you can check with your banker beforehand and ask for the appropriate process in order to make the transfer. You can also ask them to clarify any supporting documents or additional information they might need in order to approve the transfer. Likewise, if you need to send money from a platform and you're not sure if the bank accepts transfers to or from that platform, you can ask your banker. Now, everything's obviously within reason. If you email your banker and you ask if you can send $100,000 to an adult film studio in Nigeria, you can say goodbye to your US bank account. In a less extreme example, if you ask a large national bank to accept a few $1,000,000 deposit from a crypto exchange, they may also close your account too. That's why it's important to make sure you're dealing with banks that accept your profile, support your transaction flows, and won't flag you as high risk, based on the kind of activity you want to use your account for, which is exactly what we help people and businesses do through GlobalBanks USA, which you can learn more about over at globalbanks.com/USA. In fact, finding the right bank that matches your profile, your transaction activity, and your source of wealth, and even your available supporting documents, that's the most important step that you can take to make sure your accounts stay open. And if that's something that you'd like to explore more, click over here and watch this video on opening US bank accounts without a US tax ID 100% remotely as a foreign non-resident. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you over there right now.